All right, it is 1 o'clock, so we should get started, and people can watch the recording if they join a little bit late. That's okay. So I'm just going to thank everybody for joining our second session of the webinar series. My name is Danielle, and I'm part of the marketing team here at BlueLink. So I'm just going to start off by letting you all know that all the sessions are going to be recorded. As I mentioned last time, your mics and cameras should remain off. Any questions that you have, please again include them in the chat, and I will monitor that. The sessions are quite short, so if your questions aren't answered in these sessions, they definitely will be by the last session. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and introduce you all to today's presenter, Gary Lerner. Gary is the founder and president of Gateway Checker. Gary and our technical team have been working together to develop the capabilities of interoperability to achieve the 2023 requirements set up by the DSCSA. So with that being said, I'll pass this off to Gary Lerner, and you can go ahead and get started and share your screen.
All right, hopefully everybody is seeing my screen and everybody is potentially seeing me. I don't know if I'm being shared. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, we can
Okay,
hear you.
Great, super. So the topic for today is continuing on from last week, 2 weeks ago, when we talked about what the DSCSA had to do with for the industry, how it changed a lot of things. And today we're going to talk about the impact on the wholesale distributor. For those that don't know me, I've been personally involved in the industry for almost 20 years, some level of track and trace. I founded a few companies, most recently Gateway Checker. We are an application software supplier that leverages the in-depth knowledge we've gained about DSCSA and other traceability things. We've developed an interoperability platform for drug traceability. That's why we're working with BlueLink, and we've established a number of very respectable key customers who've recognized our understanding of the industry and our ability to put that into code and make available productive and beneficial applications. So Gateway Checker was founded in 2019 based on 13 years experience, and we're active participants with GS1 Healthcare and HDA VRS. Okay, so moving forward, what are we going to talk about today? We're going to talk about the DSCSA. We're going to pick up where we left off 2 weeks ago, effectively talking about the Enhanced Drug Distribution Security Act. And predominantly, the FDA, as we talked about last time, cared about the authentication, track, and control of the nation's pharmaceuticals. And essentially, they're looking to establish unique product marking that can be identified and tracked wherever the product goes up to the point of dispense. Backing up the unique product identifier is something called a transaction record. You'll hear it described different ways by different people. We're going to refer to it as the DTR, the drug transaction record. You might also hear about it as the TI and the TS, which TI standing for transaction information and TS standing for transaction statement. Any way you want to cut it, the transaction records are captured at the change of ownership, and they're exchanged one up and one back. There are new rules on licensing, compliance, and reporting that the FDA has been continuing to update and modify, one of which is reconciliation, and it's required of trading partners. We talked a little bit about that last time as well. Also with the DSCSA is this concept of electronic interoperable DTRs being exchanged, and that's going to require some new connections with suppliers and customers. And if you read through the legislation, there's quite a bit of discussion on how systems and processes have to support an accurate and very responsive traceability environment. So really, for today, what's the impact on the wholesale distributor? All of this work by the DSCSA has led us up to this statement that they keep repeating, that they're looking for an electronic interoperable system that identifies and traces certain prescription drugs as they are distributed in the US. That's their mission statement, all electronic, enhanced verification. And we're going to talk about the impact on the wholesaler today. The first one is the product identifier. those of you who spent a lot of time in the industry, you're very familiar that at the item level, there's a linear barcode that identifies the product package, right? And that, when you scan that, I've got my scanner here today. When you scan that, you get the decoding of that, and you can see that the NDC is embedded in there, prefixed with a 3. The last digit is a checksum digit, and that can easily be decoded into an NDC. And that represents the state of the art today up until DSCSA. Also on the product package is the expiration and the lot code, and there's an associated shipper case label, which frankly didn't get much attention until DSCSA. Having worked in the industry a long time, I was very aware that the shipper case label was often defined by the contract packager, really didn't even have much involvement with the drug manufacturer and the one who owned the contents of that shipper case. The world changed with DSCSA, and it continues to change. One of the biggest things that's driving change is AIDC, automatic identification capture, or barcoding. And essentially, we're shifting from a linear barcode to a 2D GS1 data matrix code. The funny looking square there with black and white checker boxes, each one being an on or off code that can be decoded. When you scan that 2D data matrix, you get a code stream that looks like that. That can be parsed into 4 pieces of information. So the product identifier for a single scan gives you 4 pieces of information: the G10, the serial number, the expiration, and the lot code. And those are the keys to product verification. Those are the keys to reconciliation, and those are the keys to traceability. So essentially, you've now got a unique license plate at the product level, and you also now have that same identification information at the shipper case level. However, the rules around GS1 and G10s state that at every different level in the packaging hierarchy, there has to be a new G10. So the same information is encoded in here, with the exception that the G10 has changed. Now, nowhere do you see the NDC. However, if you're clever enough, you can see that the NDC is embedded in here, the 123456601. So you can parse an NDC out of the G10. It's not necessarily an easy thing to do unless you know which variation of the NDC it is. But rest assured, some people can do that, and the offering that we're bringing forward in connection with BlueLink will allow us to go from G10s to NDCs without any particular issue. Okay, so that's a big shift here, moving from the linear barcode to the 2D data matrix, as well as all of the encapsulation of information. So you have lot level traceability over here on the left. You have information that's basically the NDC with the expiration and lot information, which is only accessible via human readable at the product package level. You did historically have some scanning, perhaps not uniform across the industry, but you were able to scan and decode a shipper case. Now we're talking about being able to machine read the product package and the shipper case and be able to bring into the computer system all of this information. Okay, so we're going to move on. And we're going to talk about the drug transaction record. So the first thing we talked about was the PID. The drug transaction record, which we talked about last time, is required to be exchanged at each change of ownership. It has the buyer-seller information. So this would be the seller, this would be the buyer. It has the purchase order information. You can see it down here. There's a purchase order. It contains an awful lot of information on dates. And it also has a attestation. The transaction statement is here. There's another part to the DTR which covers the product packaging hierarchy. That establishes all the PID information, the parent-child relationships. That includes the drug product, the strength, the dose of the drug, You can be decoded to the NDC. You've got the container size, the number of containers, and the lot number of the product. All of this DTR information comes from what we spoke about last time, which I promised to only show you once, which was the EPCIS format. So the EPCIS is being exchanged among the trading partners. It comes in and it gets recognized through the computer system as a DTR. And all the purpose of showing you it to you, the DTR in this format, is to show you that all that encoded information can present itself as a very human readable document, allowing you to understand what it is that you're receiving, what it is that you're taking ownership of, down to the item saleable unit and the serialized item saleable unit. Now, in order to do that, the DTR has to be exchanged at each ownership change, right? So when you look out at your network, the thing that matters is when the product changes hand. So a DTR is required coming into the distributor, and it's also required coming out of a distributor. So as a result, each time product is purchased and the ownership changes, the FDA calls that a transaction. If you see the word transfer, that does not have the same meaning as a transaction. In the FDA's eye, transfer means internal exchange. So all of these exchanges here, these would be transfers. This would be a transaction. And so the drug transaction only applies to when there is a transaction. Accountability and integrity matters in order to establish traceability. Some drug product can travel many places through many hands before it arrives on the doorsteps of a distributor. The record-keeping obligation is one up and one back for the distributor, right? So you need to know who you sold a particular item to and who you bought it from. So that's what's key. It's important to know who you're buying from, and that's one of the reasons the FDA created this authorized trading partner concept. Okay, so again, we've talked about the PID, its relationship to the DTR, and now we're going to talk about the process of reconciliation. The purpose is to ensure that the product tracing information, the electronic representation that we talked about, that EPCIS file, to make sure that it gets accurately reflected into the computers and the systems, the inventory handling systems of the trading partner. So the product is purchased, it comes in electronically, it gets manifest as a DTR, and then there's a process of reconciliation. There's a unique identifier on every item in the shipment that can be compared to the shipment. So one level of evaluation could be to just look at the outer shipper cases. Each shipper case is identified with a unique code. All of this is AIDC. It can all be scanned. The scanning is predominantly 2D data matrix. So if you haven't moved towards a 2D data matrix, that'll be an important consideration. At the item level, you have a choice. The FDA allows for inference. So you have a choice about whether you want to break apart a shipper case and understand what the children are in order to say, hey, I actually got 501 or 502, or accept, or maybe you'll do some spot checking, you'll do some acceptance sampling of these factory sealed shippers, which means you'll open up a few, you'll use statistics, and then you'll make a decision that you can infer the contents and trust that they're correct. On the outbound side, you have a similar challenge, perhaps not as complicated because you're more than likely shipping smaller units of measure, but you have the same challenges to catalog and capture what it is that you're sending out and to produce a DTR that satisfactorily addresses whether you're sending shippers or whole pallets or whatever it is that you're shipping. In order to keep track of all of this information, you need to think about who do you connect with, right? What method of connection is going to be acceptable? We know from looking out at the industry that this chart is relatively representative. There's no perfect information here, but suffice to say there are a lot of players in the industry, a lot more than meet the eye. It's not as simple as drug product going from the drug manufacturer to the wholesale distributor to middle tier distributor to the pharmacist. It travels many places, many times, many points of handling from the process. So as a result of that, you need to understand what it means for you. You need to understand what does your supply chain look like. Who are you actually dealing with? Because you need to understand how to connect information from each of these participants. There are something like 11 different 11 or 12 different EPCIS providers out there. There are different formats. There are different exchange standards. There's an awful lot to consider in order to get to connectivity. Okay. The good news is EPCIS is a recognized standard now by the FDA. That wasn't true a few months ago, and that will help allow all of us to focus in one vehicle. On the back end, you need to understand obviously who you ship to from a customer perspective. Each node in the supply network has to connect securely. We need accurate communications, and again, there are standards in place with regards to EPCIS, and there's definitely options to connect in other ways, and we'll talk about that next. So finally, when we're thinking about all the stuff that we need to do, we need to recognize that item level traceability is a disruptive technology. And what that means is the normal process you've been enjoying through lot level traceability is about to change. And that's going to impact the people, the process, the data, the technology. And then basically it's going to alter some aspects of the needs of the business in profound ways. I can tell you from personal experience, it's far from insurmountable. At the same time, I can also state unequivocally, it's not quickly, easily done either. There are many new and varied changes to the workflow. I've taken the liberty to try to identify them here off to the left. We've talked about the product identifier and the marking requirements. You'll be serializing as well. When you put items, you put loose items into a shipper, you're going to label that with its own license plate, and you're going to be required to capture that information, that parent-child information, and ship it out with a DTR. Product verification is something that's a new capability in the last couple of years that allows you to scan the PID and get information from the drug manufacturer that the product is authentic. The FDA is going to look for systems and processes over time and make sure that you're verifying the product as you handle it, particularly at saleable returns, but also if it's suspect, and I believe personally, increasingly at time of receipt. There's the DTR that needs to be exchanged. There's this process of reconciliation that we've talked about. The need to be responsive to regulatory investigations. The FDA has not been shy about saying all the things that they think they can come and ask you for information, and they also tell you what the time frames are. And if you looked at any of that, there isn't a lot of time. They're really looking for computerized responses. By that I mean that it's coming from a computer so that you can deal with their requests promptly and accurately. There's quite a bit of a need to keep all of these records, which are now far more complex, and retain them for 6 years from when you've handled it. Personally, I believe you have to retain it perhaps even longer than that. So, given all of that, there's some questions you need to start to ask yourselves. How well acquainted is your workforce with the GS1 standards for marking products and items? I rattled through a whole bunch of GS1 stuff. It would be good for people to understand what a G10 is, a GLN, a 2D data matrix, a SGLN, an SG10. These are all the core parts of the vocabulary that are essential for understanding drug traceability. The data structure, your data structures, and this is what we've been working with Darren in order to interoperate, throughout your facility and everything sort of starts with an NDC and some package level of measure. Now we're talking about PIDs. We're talking about a data structure that can go from a G10 to an NDC and keep track of different G10s at different pack levels. right? It's possible that some of your drug products have multiple tiers where things are serialized at the item level, they're serialized at a bundle, and then serialized into a shipper case, okay? So there's new ways of thinking about the drug product that you're managing. Of course, there's also this DTR to understand and manage. There's a life cycle. There's receipt of it, there's reconciliation, there's storing and retaining it, and there are new processes and technologies that need to be put in place to manage the product. So at the end of the day, systems need to manage the document and communicate supply chain integrity and item level traceability throughout the supply chain. So that brings me to 20 after. I guess, Danielle, if let me get to my final sort of wrap-up slide, and then if there are any questions, we'll go from there. So what did we discuss today? The PID becomes the key identifier for drug traceability. So the consequence or impact is that the distributor must understand and fully support the GS1 system for encoding as well as decoding products, product packaging, and drug shipments. The DTR, we talked a lot about that today and previously. It establishes the pedigree, if you want to think of it that way, the chain of custody. Who held on to this drug, when, and where did it go? Where is it now? What state is it in? It is the quickest way for the FDA to understand the integrity of the drug supply network. It's also the biggest way for them to understand major discrepancies. That'll be a huge red flag that will expose your company to investigations if, in fact, you're involved with a DTR that has major discrepancies from what it's supposed to. As a result, processes and procedures need to be put into place that can handle short-shipped, overages, content errors, things like that. Those processes are still being evolved and developed. We're working, and I don't mean necessarily just us, but I'm saying even at the industry level, there's still some discussion about how do we handle a product that's mislabeled on the DTR. Do we get a new DTR? Can people do that? Do we adjust the DTR? There's definitely a lot of change that's going to happen over the next 1 to 2 years with regards to reconciliation so that we understand how to handle overages, errors, short shipments. Reconciliation is the process and the means to assure supply integrity. Poor processes, procedures, things like that, if they occur in the reconciliation process, it's going to be troublesome for all concerned. You may have heard at one point this concept of a perfect order. That really applies here. And the concept of the perfect order is the customer gets exactly the intended items. In this case, we're talking exactly the intended items, the right quantity, the right NDC, the right G10, but in this case, we're talking down to the right serial number. No more and no less. And making sure that at time of receipt, as well as at time of fulfillment, that all of this stuff is zeroed out and understood. We talked about connectivity. The requirement from the FDA is for electronic interoperable traceability. Paper documentation is not going to suffice by itself. Could print a report, but it needs to be backed up by an electronic interchange. Many key industry participants, manufacturers and wholesalers, they've been committed to the GS1 EPCIS standard for a long time. Only recently did the FDA endorse it and say it was a recommended approach to drug traceability, and they've not made any other recommendations for any other electronic interchange format. Will every manufacturer be able to support this? We think so. Will every wholesaler? From what we can see, all the major wholesalers do. Will every manufacturer aggregate items to a case? If they don't do that, then inference, which we spoke about today, will not be applicable. We don't know that everybody is going to aggregate. We know that most people, it's not a requirement of the law, but the consequence of not having it means that you have to open up every shipper case in order to get to a good level of reconciliation. So we think there's going to be a tremendous amount of pressure on manufacturers that don't aggregate. We'll have to wait and see as to how many there are of that. The wholesalers have indicated there's quite a few, but by the same token, they've been unable to provide a number and whatnot. So that might be something that you want to explore within your drug mix, is how many of the drug manufacturers are providing aggregated information. With regards to exchange of information, BlueLink and Gateway, our expectation is that we're going to get an EPCIS inbound to you. And that's the way we're gearing that information. We can get that through email, we can get that through AS2 connectivity, we can get that through a portal. But we're looking to prime the system and prime the reconciliation process with that EPCIS file. However, questions remain about the dispensers. Will they be able to receive and process an EPCIS message? Will an electronic delivery or link to a PDF, perhaps like the DTR that we're showing, which is available, it will be available to you to send as a link, PDF link. Will that be sufficient? It appears like it does meet the requirements. It's electronic, it's interoperable. It doesn't go directly into a computer system. It wouldn't support that, but perhaps that's not a requirement of the dispensers. Another alternative is to provide an electronic link to a portal, and the DTR reports can be executed and or downloaded there. So finally, hopefully your takeaway from today is that processes, systems, and things like that, the workflow, the data needs, they need an upgrade. We have a disruptive capability coming our way, item level traceability. And we need to be able to manage and document and communicate throughout the supply chain, what the integrity is and status, and any issues that we recover. They will come from the DTR, but we're going to need to address them in lots of different ways. Okay, so that brings us to 1:27 according to my clock. We promised to do this in a half an hour. Are there any questions that I could address in the next 3 minutes?
We didn't receive any questions in the chat other than Michael's, who asked, do we need to maintain history back to the manufacturer once November 23 happens?
Oh, that's a great question. Very astute. So the DTR used to, well, up until 2023, required people to provide history. And all along, we as part of Gateway Checker, we've been testing and certifying EPCIS files. We have never seen a TH produced by anybody, and we don't think anybody will actually produce a TH. The wholesalers don't believe it's a requirement going forward, and it does seem to be specifically dropped from the regulation. So what that means is, how does the FDA get from the end of the chain all the way back to the beginning? We believe that they're just going to go one up, one back, find who sent it to the wholesaler. I'm sorry, find out who sent it to the dispenser, who sent it to the distributor, who sent it to the wholesaler, and which manufacturer, when did it come from the manufacturer? So they're going to work backwards one at a time. That's why we think EPCIS is going to be so important. Personally, we wouldn't be surprised if at one point in the future, not today, one point in the future, the FDA requires everybody to give the EPCIS files in and out, and then they aggregate them, and then they build their traceability backwards electronically. There is no system at the moment that's going to cover all the history. The requirement at the moment and in the law is one up and one back, and a lot of people in the industry are hoping it stays like that, but that doesn't quite address this history comment that you brought up, Michael, and what the FDA wants to accomplish here.
All right, fantastic. So that was all the questions in the chat. If anybody has any other questions, feel free to email me, and I'll make sure that they get answered either in the next session or by Gary. So just before I log off, everybody, the next session is October 19th, and we'll address what's next for BlueLink customers. This will be part 1. All right, so we'll see you all October 19th. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.